Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. On the show today, as The Guardian's coverage of Edward Snowden's intelligence leaks put British national security at risk. David Cameron says yes, so does Nick Clegg. But Vince the Cable says the paper has done a considerable public service. We'll debate the issues. Plaid Cymru kicks off its autumn party conference in Aberystwyth. I'll be talking live to party leader Leanne Wood. Could global warming do more to help humans than harm them? The Danish environmentalist Bjorn Lomborg, he'll be here to discuss his theories. And we report from Strasbourg on the European Parliament vote to slap bigger health warnings on cigarette packets and help stub out smoking. So that's coming up in the next hour. With us for the duration of the first half hour is the editor of The Independent, Amal Rajan. Welcome.
Thank you.
As well as editing a national newspaper. He's found time to write a book about history's greatest spin bowlers.
Which you've read, is that right, Andrew?
Not yet, but I will now I've known you've written it. This week he told readers of the Evening Standard how hard it is to find a good reggae nightclub in London.
Absolutely impossible.
Of course, he never consulted me. Well, let's start with the latest on the attempts by the three main parties in Westminster to agree a new form of regulation for the press. Ross Hawkins has been keeping an eye on developments all week. Ross, who's involved in this? What, are they getting close to an agreement? What are they trying to do?
Andrew, I spent all morning up here for you on this balcony, just trying to look over these rooftops to try and see white smoke arising as the thrilling conclusion of the cross-party talks finally comes. I have to tell you, this is a smoke-free panorama so far. What's happening, Harriet Harman, Maria Miller, the Culture Secretary, and someone called Lord Wallace for the Lib Dems are having a debate about quite a small part of a much bigger debate. They agreed a version of what they called a royal charter, a plan for regulating the press back in March. They agreed to reopen for discussions a couple of bits of that, one of which is to do with whether you should have to pay money if you end up in a complex and serious dispute with a newspaper. But, and here is the key thing, whether they agree or not, they are not going to make a great many of the newspapers happy because, frankly, while these issues are important to them, they won't be doing anything about some of the other issues that plenty of papers think are much bigger, like the capacity of lords, ladies and MPs back there to change the system on their own in the future.
All right, Ross, thanks for that update. Keep up there. I'm sure there'll be... Oh, look, there's white smoke. Look behind. Just joking. Got you. It's not even April Fool. Where's the Independent on this? Your paper seems to have been all over the place.
Not at all. We stood with The Guardian and the Financial Times initially in saying that we were very interested to hear what Parliament produced. And, I mean, I'm yet personally to be convinced of the need for statutory underpinning, but the point is we're trying to...
So you've changed?
No, not at all. What we
New
wanted
editor, new ideas.
New editor, lots of new ideas, not on this particularly. We've got a corporate position which I've stuck to. What we want is for the two parties to come together, and I know you're going to say this is a typical independent fudge, but actually I think that the difference between the two parties, so the press and groups like the Mail and the Telegraph on one hand, and the view of Parliament is actually not that huge. And what we'd like to do is to get them to come together and talk about it. Yeah,
it does sound like the Independent. My understanding is that you're not that keen on the newspaper industry's proposals, and you're not that keen on the government's proposals.
Well, we're looking. There's something going on in Parliament today. We're going to have a look at that and see whether or not it's effective, see whether or not it works. I don't think it's going to satisfy several newspaper groups. There is a question as to whether or not whatever Parliament produces, if it doesn't satisfy the newspaper groups, whether or not it makes the newspaper industry lack the trust of the public even more than it does at the moment. So we're going to look at the proposals. We're going to look at the proposals and see whether or not they work.
Will you sign up in there if the government brings this into law? Will you sign up? Will you conform?
We'll have a look. We'll have a look before we sign up.
Well, everybody's going to have a look.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to say here whether or not we're going to sign up because we haven't looked. Well, because we haven't had a look at what's being put forward by Parliament today.
But you know the principle of whether newspapers should be regulated by statute is quite an important... You don't need to look at that. That is the line the government wants to go. Do you accept that principle?
We've said that we think that it ought to be accepted, that what Parliament puts forward after a judge-led inquiry is something that we sign up to, and we're with The Guardian and the Financial Times on that. Having said that...
They've changed their positions too.
Oh, you'd have to ask them about that. I don't know if they've changed their position. But what we've said is we'll have to have a look at what comes out of today, and what we're in favour of is Parliament and the newspaper groups coming together and trying to find common ground on this. What we want after all this is for newspapers to have more trust from the public than they do at the moment. You know, all of this, Andrew, as you know, is a function of the weakness of newspapers and not of their strength. There's a feeling that among newspapers that we're, as an industry, on our knees. There's a feeling that we're facing huge commercial pressures. And there's a feeling that this might curtail our ability to do what we do best. And so what we want is for a negotiated and agreed position which allows newspapers to go on causing mischief.
OK. Speaking of newspapers, should a newspaper print a story, even if it might jeopardise national security? The Guardian's already published leaks by the former US intelligence contractor Edward Snowden and says it'll print more revelations from him. The paper's editor, Alan Rusbridger, said they were right to publish the files and have helped to prompt a necessary and overdue debate. The Guardian says more than 20 newspaper editors from a dozen countries support its decision. But there's been fierce criticism of The Guardian. Earlier this week, the Director General of MI5, Andrew Parker, warned it causes enormous damage to make public the reach and limits of GCHQ techniques. And the former head of GCHQ, David Ormand, said leaking surveillance programme details has been, quote, the most catastrophic loss to British intelligence ever, worse than traitors Philby, Burgess and McLean. Yesterday, Nick Clegg said that some of the information published by The Guardian would have gone over the head of his readers, but would have been immensely interesting to people who want to harm the UK. Meanwhile, David Cameron had this to say.
When you get newspapers who get hold of vast amounts of data and information that is effectively stolen information, and they think it's somehow okay to reveal this, I think they've got to think about their responsibilities. They've got to think about, are they helping to keep our country safe?
But not everyone in the Cabinet's critical of The Guardian. Here's what Business Secretary Vince Cable had to say on the Today programme this morning.
I think The Guardian has done a very considerable public service. I think, Mr. Snowden's contribution is twofold, one of which is a positive one, which is whistleblowing, and the other of which is more worrying, that a large amount of genuinely important intelligence material does seem to have been passed across. But I think the conclusion which Nick Clegg came to and set out this morning is that we do need to have proper political oversight of the intelligence services, and arguably we haven't until now.
With us now, Rachel Robinson from the human rights campaigning group Liberty. We're also joined by the writer and commentator Douglas Murray, who earlier this week wrote an article headlined "Why All This Country's Enemies Will Be Grateful for the Schoolboy Vanity of The Guardian." So I guess we can conclude he's not a supporter. Vince Cable said that The Guardian had performed a very considerable public service. What do you say to that?
Well, it's nonsense, and Vince Cable is simply trying to tread a position that he thinks he'll appeal to his voters. He thinks that it's, as it were, liberal to support whistleblowing, but he recognises there's a national security problem. It's extraordinary that a member of a government can in any way condone what has been, as the intelligence chiefs have said this week, an absolutely catastrophic gift to this country's enemies.
What do you say to that?
Well, I think what we have to remember here is that, of course, just like MI5 have responsibilities, whistleblowers and newspapers who publish this kind of information have ethical responsibilities. In our view, all the information that has been published to date has in no way compromised national security. And as far as we
How
can,
do you know that?
Well, as far as we can see, the information published so far has been published carefully has been published ethically.
But
And of
David
course,
Ormand, who's the former head of GCHQ, he's now a distinguished professor at a London university, he says it's the most catastrophic loss of British intelligence ever. Now, how do you know more than him?
In response to that, all we can say is, look, we don't know what kind of information is going to be disclosed in the future, but as far as we can see, up to this point, there has been a very careful and considered approach. Of course, it would be irresponsible to release huge swathes of information without
But they have released
sorting it
huge
and
swathes of
considering.
information, and it's shown by publishing it. It hasn't just shown how we could be under surveillance. It has shown those who would destroy us the manner in which GCHQ and the NSA and other agencies go about gathering this information. That is surely vital information to the enemy.
We really don't consider that anything that's been released so far is of that nature. But essentially, what's happened here is that a public debate has been promoted about an issue of huge importance, to have the MI5 and to have the chief of the MI5 come out and say, look, this is essentially a treacherous act, really, to say, that if you're not with us, you're against us. It's deeply misleading, deeply concerning.
We needed a debate, did we not, about the manner of surveillance that is going on in this country. We know that they're trying to get the bad guys, but we're also worried that we, the ordinary people, could be collateral damage in this.
Sure, there's a legitimate public concern about the way in which intelligence agencies go about their business. There are all sorts of checks and balances already in place, including parliamentary oversight, to check that that is done in an appropriate manner. But the discussion has come so far, if I may say so, onto the issue of what has been published so far by The Guardian. What has been ignored is a far more problematic thing, which is that the tens of thousands of files which The Guardian has had unredacted access to, which it has sent around the world with a glee and a frivolity which is astonishing. Let me give one example. The so-called reporter, journalist Glenn Greenwald, his boyfriend had his flights paid for by The Guardian, and the boyfriend of a journalist from The Guardian was travelling around the world with tens of thousands of files on his person. If anybody is so naive as to think that by now these entire files are not wholly in the possession of the Chinese Communist Party, are not wholly in the possession of the Russian security service, they are naive beyond words.
Well, then before I do, I want a reaction to that.
I mean, I think that the first thing that was said there, that there is oversight. There is oversight of the security services, and that is sufficient. It's deeply
No,
concerning.
that's not what he's talking about. But what he's saying is there are 58,000 top secret documents which Snowden and his people are going around the world. The Guardian had. They've been spread all over the place. It is inconceivable, he says, that the Russians and the Chinese don't have access to that now. They'll have broken into their computers and got them. That's surely a threat to national security.
As far as we're aware, as I've said before, as far as we're aware, things that are a danger to national security.
You do not know what they have in Beijing or Moscow.
Chinese Communist Party is not yet
here
announced.
to defend our human rights.
Absolutely.
You're not intelligence experts. You have no idea about the capabilities of Moscow and Beijing to get access to 58,000 top secret documents.
No, we don't, and we don't have detailed information.
So therefore you're not in a position to say.
But what we are in a position to talk about is the constitutional balance here. What we are in a position to talk about is scrutiny of our security services, and also about ethical journalism and the responsibility on journalists, which
this
exists
isn't journalism.
Absolutely.
Rachel, are you happy for editors of national papers to be making decisions about national security? Do you think they're qualified? Do you think they've got the judgment? I mean, I'm just interested. Do you think they've got the experience, the knowledge and the judgment to make decisions about incredibly sophisticated intelligence, which may have an impact on Britain a decade from now?
This is not, of course it is not, concerns have been expressed about, on what basis journalists have the right to make this decision and what puts them in a good position to do so. But let's not forget that in a democracy, journalism, one of the core functions of journalism is to hold the powerful to account, is to hold the agencies.
You don't need to tell me that.
And that's really central to...
And I would defend to the death...
Would you have published all this stuff?
Rusbridge's stuff. Well, I think I may have published a bit less of it. There's three. I mean, you're talking about stuff we don't know, and I think that is the key point here, which is we don't know what the Guardian redacted. We don't know exactly what advice they got from the government, and we don't know what on earth terrorists might do with this information many, many moons from now. I think actually that would mean on the side of caution. I used to work at the Foreign Office, and I used to work with a lot of intelligence officials. They are incredibly hard-working and effective people who exist on the basis of a network of trust and require a certain sort of modicum of secrecy. I don't really instinctively believe in making their job so much harder. If there's anything that we can do to sort of allow them... And the problem that they've got is that all of the victories that they chalk up, all of the success that they get, we don't sing about, we don't know about.
Because we often don't know.
If I may add to that, I mean, because there is an elision here between journalism and activism. The Guardian has taken upon itself in recent months and years to repeatedly try to put our national security at risk by publishing documents, by holding on to documents, by dispersing documents. And if anyone needed any demonstration of this change that has happened at the paper, you can see it from what Glenn Greenwald, the so-called journalist, said when his partner was detained for a few hours, completely legitimately at Heathrow Airport. What Greenwald said was that he would now, because of what had happened to his partner being detained, he would now publish far more. And he said, I have secrets on the British intelligence services, and that Britain will regret doing this to my partner. That's not the language of a journalist.
I understand that. I think later on he did say he'd been speaking in anger, and so.
Well, he's obviously been leaking in anger.
What we
as well.
don't know, Douglas Murray, is are the security service bigging this up? They hate when what they do gets into the public domain. They always have.
Well, and they've got questions to answer. I mean, why was this information allowed? Why was Edward Snowden allowed to produce this information? There is an element of this. It's not the governing element, but there's an element of this where...
Why did it ever get to him in the first place?
Why did it ever get to him in the first place?
We don't know if it's really as serious as they claim, and there's no way we can know.
No, the Director General of MI5 is not a man given to overstatement, I would say.
Do we know that?
And but there is now there's Amel says a perfectly sensible discussion to be had about the number of people, particularly contractors, who have access to the kind of information that Snowden did. I mean, is something still a secret if 100,000 people have access to it? There's definitely a debate over that. But really, it comes down to here is the decision by the Guardian to be the person that has the oversight and makes the decisions over what should and should not be in the public domain. We used to say, who guards the Guardian? I think that's a more legitimate question now than ever.
Where do we go from here? Would you like to see more of this published?
Look, I think without these publications, without Snowden's role in this, we would not be having a public debate in this country about our surveillance system.
So
these kind of what was actually happening would not have become apparent, and we would not be having the very legitimate debate.
So you think it's a good thing that Mr. Snowden, an American citizen, now in the hands of Mr. Putin? I would suggest that your organisation wouldn't survive 24 hours in Mr. Putin's Russia.
Of course.
He's in the hands of Mr. Putin, and you think it's a good thing that he has 58,000 documents of British secrets?
What I said was that I think without his actions, without the Guardian's actions, we would simply not be having a discussion of an issue of huge significance. We think that Snowden's actions were brave.
So it is a good
thing. We think that he has done a public service. We think the Guardian has done a public service in publishing.
So you're not at all worried that this American citizen who stole 58,000 documents of British national secrets is now in the hands of the Kremlin? That doesn't worry you at all?
That's a separate issue,
No,
really. I mean, what we're talking about is whether, and I think the question was whether it was a good thing that he had.
Do you think it is a good thing he's got these documents?
I didn't say that. What I said was I think it's a good thing that these revelations have come to light, and it simply wouldn't have happened without the actions of one individual who was willing to take that risk.
What do you say to that? It wouldn't have happened if he hadn't. We wouldn't know the extent of the surveillance on us if Mr. Snowden hadn't did what he's done.
We would. Anyone who knows what is happening in intelligence service, anyone who knows how electronic data surveillance and gathering occurs would have had some decent idea. But the Guardian and its supporters are talking about this as if this is a debating game. It's so wonderful, we've had an open debate and so on. They seem to read these documents as if this is purely about a debate between the liberal intelligentsia in London. It isn't. It is not about how the Guardian reads these documents. It's about how the Communist Party of China reads these documents. It's how Al-Shabaab will read these documents. It's how all of the enemies of this country will read these documents. And on that issue, neither you, the Guardian, nor any of its apologists have any clue what they're talking about.
OK, we're going to have to leave there. That's the best debate we've had on this subject. It's a good one, too. Now, the party conference season may be over for the main parties at Westminster, but there are still more to come. The SNP holds its conference next week in Perth, and today members of Plaid Cymru are meeting in Aberystwyth. In a moment, I'll be speaking to Plaid's leader, Leanne Wood. First, though, James Williams reports on the challenges facing the Welsh Nationalist Party.
Aberystwyth, popular seaside resort and possibly the most enjoyable and relaxed place to gain the best insight into the Welsh psyche. Not my words, but those of one Mike Parker writing some 20 years ago. Now, a twister plot finds the author standing as the local Westminster candidate for Plaid Cymru. But gathering here this weekend for its national conference, the party isn't here to soul search. They did that after a disappointing result in the last Assembly elections where, and Lib Dems take note, they fell from being the second biggest party and junior coalition partners to third behind the Tories. Now they've reflected on that and now they're here to celebrate as a party that feels it's on the up. Thanks in no small part to a thumping victory in this summer's Anglesey Assembly by-election.
Plaid have shown that they've remembered how to campaign. And that will give the whole party a boost of confidence. But there's some major strategic challenges for the party and for Leanne Wood, which remain to be addressed.
And therefore I can declare that the new leader of Plaid Cymru is Leanne Wood.
That was over 18 months ago, and since then, the committed socialist has prioritised the economy. But do they offer a credible alternative at a time of austerity?
We were the party that held the economic portfolio at a time of the worst recession for 70, 80 years, and I think we did pretty well in the end defending communities, putting in place policies which the Welsh Government under the Labour tag has actually taken forward, and they haven't ditched any of our economic policies. So to a certain extent, there's a job of work to demonstrate to people that we are competent in dealing with the economic crisis.
Perceived by some as a party only for Welsh speakers, Plaid's progress has been slow, almost non-existent outside the language's heartlands. So electing Leanne Wood, the first